I'm so glad to be here today with you. It's like a whole new group of people, and it's so exciting. I'm going to talk about how to be a better podcast guest. I don't know if a lot of you doing podcast guesting, but it is fun. I've been doing this for 5 years now since started our podcast booking agency in 2020. And for me, it's just so much fun to be a guest on other people's podcast. But there's always a magic behind how to do it better, how to be more efficient, and how to stand out when it comes to podcast guesting. So, first of all, I have a couple of tips for you. I just want to share my knowledge with you. First of all, let's talk about doing your research. When it comes to podcast guesting, it's incredibly important to do the research before the interview. My advice is never wing a single podcast interview. When you do your research, be super clear about what your business about, because who your ideal client is. Because if you're not super clear about that, you won't know what kind of podcast you need to approach. So first of all, go to Apple Podcasts, go on YouTube. I mean, YouTube is the second biggest search engine right now. You can find lots of podcasts there, and try to get a feel of those podcasts. Try to get the vibe of those podcasts. It's really important to listen at least one episode, and even before you approach the host. I had all these horror stories in my life, and people reached out to different podcasts. They are in e-commerce. For example, the podcast is an e-com podcast, and a yoga instructor reaches out to them because she wants to be a guest on the show. But obviously, she never, ever checked the podcast. I think it's really important. And just being super clear about who you want to contact when it comes to podcasts. So the second thing is, obviously you need to reach out. You need a pitch where you need to include all the most important details about you. It also needs to be like on a sweet spot, not too long. You don't have to write a novel, and not too short either. The most important information that you can include in your bio, your social links, your website. If you have done a podcast interview before, you can include that too, because hosts, they love check you out, check those interviews before they even reply to your email. So it's really important to include a couple of topics, talking points you want to cover during the interview. So that's the second step. Once you found the podcast, you can approach them. Always find some way to reach out to the host. I mean, LinkedIn, I think, is a super place to do that. I mean, I do a lot of business on LinkedIn with hosts, with potential clients. So you can always reach out to potential podcast hosts on LinkedIn, but there are also different ways to find their email address so you can get in touch with them. Once you landed a podcast, what to do now? It's like you're ready, but be ready. Come prepared. Always come prepared. You can have cheat sheets around you. Usually the podcast interviews are free-flow conversation nowadays. There are a few podcast hosts who will send you a list of questions, but it depends. So be always prepared. Know your topics, know your talking points. It's really important. Once the host accepted you, we are all happy, and try to be, so you're ready for the interview, get into that kind of mindset. For example, on that specific day, when you have like 2 podcast interviews, don't schedule other calls. Be present. Focus on that conversation. Because I know people, they do tail-to-tail podcast interviews, and by the end of the day, the audience will feel that you're burned out, you're tired, and your energy is just not there. So just pick one interview per day. That's what I'm doing this week. Like, this is my interview for today. I come prepared, and I'm present, and I just want to be present with you and share my knowledge. I think it's really important. It's a free flow conversation. Treat it as a conversation between 2 friends over a cup of coffee or tea. It's so different when you have a keynote speech than having a podcast interview. You don't have to do a monologue when you do a podcast interview. It's like 50% of the time split up between the host and the guest. So don't treat it as a monologue. This is not only about you. These are questions and replies, and that's the fun of it. So I think that's also important to remember. Be respectful, be ready. Don't leave the dirty laundry in the background. Have a nice place, like something that people want to look at it. And also, like when you prepare yourself, like put on the nice clothes. Obviously, for women, for us, makeup is always a must. Maybe not for everyone, but yes, it's a must. It takes us at least half an hour to get ready for an interview. It's important to be respectful. Remember that you are a guest on someone else's show, and be always punctual, be there, be ready. Always check your camera, your microphone, your internet connection, because if something goes wrong, it will go wrong during the interview. So always get ready, everything charged up and everything muted on your computer. I usually put my phone on airplane mode so nothing can come through. I think that's really important. Nothing disturbs the conversation. During the interview, my advice is always to be vulnerable and happy to share your story, because that's why you're there. And always provide value. That's the most important thing. Don't treat a podcast interview as a promotional space for your book, for your coaching program, for your service. There's always a space and time for that, but don't treat it as a promotional space, because it is not. You are a guest, and accept that. I am 100% sure that all of the podcast hosts that will have you as a guest on the show, they will have time dedicated for you to do that. At the end of the show, you have a call to action. You can tell about your website, you can talk about your service, about your book, about your LinkedIn profile, whatever you want, but just be respectful and don't over promote yourself. I also have a few horror stories about that when the host asks the guest, so how we know about more about this or about that? Like, oh, you can find it in my book on page 32 or page 55. No, that's not the place to do on a podcast. You come here to bring value, to add value. And I think that's pretty important. So the interview went well and you were happy with it. I always advise my clients to, why not jump on pro-interview conversation chat with the podcast host after the interview? Usually when the interview finishes, everybody rushes away because we all have hundreds of things to do, but you can always arrange a Zoom chat or something like that with the host, and you never know how you can help each other. I believe in the go-giver mentality. I'm part of Bob Burg's go-giver community. So for me, it's like giving value to other people's life is really important. So once I finish an interview, I usually schedule a chat with them, how we can help each other. We can be in a business relationship later. It can be a friendship later. There's so many endless possibilities out there, but we just have to use it wisely when we are podcast guests. And also important to say thank you to the host, because most of people forget to do that. Send a thank you note. I know it works brilliantly if you send out cards. You can just send a thank you for every single podcast you were a guest on, and they will remember it. Even if you do it by email, that's fine too, or you text a podcast host or whatever. Just say thank you. It's just 2 words, but they have their magic. It's so important. And so many people think it's obvious, like we always say thank you. No, people don't say thank. They never thank their podcast host. And I know most of my friends come from the podcasting world, and they do an awesome job. They're producing a lot of content, putting a lot of energy into creating these episodes. And most people don't even tag them on, LinkedIn, and even as a guest. So that's always amazes me. Like, that's a great opportunity to do that. Once the episode is live, you can always share the episode on different social media platforms. Always tag the podcast host, because you not only reach, it's not just respectful, but you always reach another targeted audience, like basically the podcast host audience. So that's key. That's a must when you do podcast guesting. But obviously you can do that on Facebook, on Instagram. I have different accounts, and I always promote every single show on my social media accounts. That's very important. Many people ask me why podcast guesting is a good marketing strategy. I think it's a brilliant marketing strategy if you have an established business. So many people think that they're just starting out, they don't even have a website, but if they start doing podcast guesting, they will get hundreds of clients, like from one day to another. No, that won't happen. Podcast guesting, I always think like marketing is like 4 legs of a table, and podcast guesting is just one of them. Once you have an established business, Once you have a website, a product, a service, you wrote a book or something, then you can start doing podcast guesting. I get that question a lot. When should I start podcast guesting? You feel that you're ready. I've been in this business and this is our 5th year. In the first year, my main focus was on getting clients. Once I got those clients on board, then I started to do podcast guesting. I learned a lot about how to do podcast guesting so I could share my knowledge about it. Why is it good for marketing to do podcast guesting? You reach a very targeted audience. That's really important. Just imagine like a full of 100 people. They just tune in and they just want to listen to whatever you want to say and share your knowledge. So that's important. Second, credibility. Like once people type your name into Google, you pop up everywhere. Podcast interview here, podcast interview there. Obviously, that brings credibility to your name. I think it's really, really important. But it's also important to think about how important podcast guesting is when it comes to networking. I think for me and for other people too, is the 21st century's best networking tool because you already establishing relationship with the podcast host and the podcast host audience. And then you can just network away. You can ask for introductions from the podcast host. And it's just a brilliant tool that you can use whenever you are on a podcast. You always provide value. That's also very important. You build a relationship with people. It's also very important when it comes to marketing. One of the most important things we shouldn't forget is being consistent when it comes to podcast guesting. I had a few ex-clients, I have to say ex, because they thought that after 2 podcast interviews, they will get hundreds of clients, hundreds of deals, they're going to say hundreds of books, and they will wait. Like they told me, I'm going to do 2 interviews, then we'll see what's going to happen. Not much. After 2 podcast interviews, not much will happen when it comes to business and marketing. You need to do it consistently and persistently like anything else you're doing in business. Nothing's going to happen overnight. It's like going to the gym. You're not going to look like Schwarzenegger in 2 weeks. It's the same with podcast guesting. I always advise my clients to do it at least 4 to 6 months to see the results. You need to build up that kind of momentum, and that takes time like everything else. When you are on a podcast, express gratitude because it's just so important. We don't do that very often. Just express gratitude why you are there and just do that every single time after a show because I think it's really important.
Unlock the full potential of networking with East Trade Wins. Are you eager to connect with our esteemed guest speaker and delve deeper into the ever-expanding universe of connections? Simply scan the QR code now and embark on a journey of endless opportunities. Join us at East Trade Wins, where we gather online via Zoom every Tuesday from 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, you're welcome to connect with us. Seize the moment, register for free, and start exploring today. Fancy sharing your insights as a guest speaker? We're looking for you. Reach out to Wayne Pratt to ignite your speaking journey. Email him at wayne@motivateyou.ca or connect with Wayne on LinkedIn. Don't wait. Take action and be a part of a global community that's shaping the future of business networking.